Hello and welcome to Portsmouth This Week. I'm your host, Conley Zani. This show is under the auspices of Rich Raiiner, our Portsmouth Town Administrator. Together, Rich, myself, and the entire Portsmouth This Week team are on a mission to build community. We do that by bringing you accurate and timely information about the issues that impact you. We introduce you to the faces and the leaders that make up the fabric of this amazing community in which we live. This week, we're talking about the American Rescue Plan Act and what we're going to be using those funds for here in Portsmouth. My guest is our town administrator himself. Welcome, Rich Raiiner. Thank you. Thank you for being on the show. Yeah, I am actually surprised that I'm saying this. I am excited about talking about the ARPA funding. I mean, and I can't believe I've learned so much doing this show, and I'm very grateful for you coming in. And I want to try to just clarify some things from people because, again, I think this is my thing. I'm out on social media and I'm hearing all sorts of misinformation and everything. So thank you for coming in to help. We're just trying to sort of set the record straight on what these funds are, what is ARPA, and let's start with what it is and what are the guidelines of the U.S. Department of Treasury that's issuing these funds to us. What are they saying we've got to use them for?
Yeah. Well, a little bit of history first. ARPA, it was almost a chicken before the egg or the cart before the horse
I believe
scenario because the announcements about ARPA and the money that was going to come to the communities throughout the country, those announcements were made prior to the definition of what we could use those monies for.
So people got really excited.
People got really excited, and obviously, the catchphrase was, "It's a nice problem to have." We're getting money. We don't really know what we can use it for, so I've been keeping the council informed. How much money we were anticipating to receive and when we would receive it, and then as information was released from the Department of Treasury and guidance from the state, I tried to get that to the council as quickly as I could to let them know that we're planning for this, these are the things that we could do with it, and these are the timetables that we have to follow. So ultimately what has come out, and guidance, quite frankly, is still being developed.
Yeah, it's kind of evolving somewhat, right?
Yeah, and that's a bit of a frustration, but it really comes down to there's a few pots. You could use the money to backfill revenue losses from that you can attribute to COVID, and there's a formula that was given to us, and you could plug in the monies in your budget into an algorithm, and then it'll spit out a number that tells you that for our case it's about $2 million could be used to backfill the general fund. There's another pot of money for premium pay for workers involved in COVID. So, your first responders, clinics, stuff like that. Then really what they want you to do, the third pot is to provide relief to people from the effects of the pandemic.
Right.
And then the emphasis, however, has been water, sewer, broadband. That's where, initially it came out, it was water, sewer, broadband, and that has been the consistent theme from the beginning to where we are now.
And that's really about trying to make us a more resilient community.
They want you to become more resilient and able to, if this were to ever happen again, how would the community be able to weather the storm without worrying about how they would get information out to the public, how the public would be able to get information from authorities and first responders and other communities, and not have to worry about your infrastructure.
Yeah, life safety and communication kinds of things.
Exactly. So we started planning right from the get-go. How do we stay within the guidelines, and we had to develop what are some of our overarching rules that we think we need to follow so that we get the we provide the maximum effect for the greatest good for Portsmouth with these funds.
So this is the Portsmouth game plan, like kind of your guiding principles as you think about how to use these funds.
Exactly.
All right, so what were those?
Rule number one we did not want to create a structural deficit. So going into this, the staff had to, anything that was presented to the group regarding how we could spend APRA had to follow that rule. That was the golden rule.
So can I ask, does that really mean you don't want to put a program in place that you're going to get a bill for later or something?
Correct.
Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, so this money, it's total, it's about $5 million. We have received half of it. We'll get the next half of it next year, and it's divided between money directly to the community and directly to counties. We live in Newport County. We don't have a county government, so that was divided up between the communities in Newport County. We'll get our share. So overall, it's about $5 million.
Okay.
That money has to be obligated by the end of 2024, and it has to be spent by the end of 2026. So of course, I've heard things, staff has been planning for this, how to use this money. Well, I don't take that as a negative.
You're
of
always
course, we're planning. What kind of community would we be if the people that are hired and trusted to administer to the needs of the municipality aren't planning? So that, of course.
Okay, so back to game plan, though.
Back to game plan.
So you're like, let's not create a
don't
deficit.
create a structural deficit.
Okay.
So, i.e., when the money runs out, we don't want musical chairs where somebody's, there's a program or an employee or something left hanging out, and we don't have a way to pay for it. So, no structural deficit.
Okay.
What are our needs versus our wants? We all want wonderful things for the community, and that's what drives us. But are there needs that need to be addressed that we haven't been able to afford, and how do we take advantage of this infusion of funds, which is really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to fix things that have been either postponed, ignored, or just plain fallen off the cliff because we
couldn't get there.
Can't get to it.
Yeah. Okay.
And then and then of what is chosen, can we create something that is self-sustaining, or can we create something that will last a long time and won't have to be addressed again?
Like a sustainable
benefit to the community. And can we address something in those pots there, the pots that I identified, can we address something there and use the money for those pots that were identified by the Department of Treasury?
Right.
So we did that. One of the things that we have a very difficult time with, budget-wise, are capital improvements. And one of the biggest capital, I'll just kind of go through some of the things, and I know I'm going to forget some. I don't have any notes in front of me.
Some of the things that you're recommending?
What we had recommended to the council, and that was, we wanted to come before the council with a plan, with a recommendation, and we needed to get the council to decide what are the priorities for the ARPA funds.
Yeah. And let me clarify too,
Yeah.
the council is going to ultimately decide.
Correct.
Like, it is the council's decision. You and a team of people that have been studying these guidelines and kind of creating the framework for what would be important. You're just making a recommendation.
The recommendations, the council, right up front, there were some things that were identified very early on that were within the guidelines of ARPA, which was a very small percentage of the overall amount of money that we were going to receive. And quite frankly, the emphasis back then was to get a project approved that would create a sustainable, lasting system that would allow the community to interact with the town council remotely. We received an executive order. We had about 3 days to implement it. We've had a jury-rigged system ever since then. However, ARPA funds are authorized to be used to revamp your town halls across the country to provide for that service if you choose.
Right?
We could have ignored it because the executive order is now relaxed. We are no longer required to stream, and we are no longer required to allow remote participation. But that was another thing that we in Town Hall looked at, and we said, how do you put the genie back in the bottle, and is that something that you would really want to do? We've crossed that threshold. We've demonstrated that we can do this. People before the pandemic talked about doing this.
Yeah.
And
now
so
you're
let's
doing
do
it.
So we're going to do it. So the council approved that. And then there were some public safety related things that we wanted to take care of that really needed to be addressed. So we looked at some of those, and the council approved some public related safety stuff, a dispatch council, some software, an ambulance, and the revamp of town hall audiovisual systems. So now fast forward, we also were mandated to get public input. There was no guidance on how to do that. So we looked around the state, and one of the best ways that we were able to determine was to open up a community survey. So we
I did
advertised
that
it.
survey.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Did most people do it or no?
Well, let me put it this way. You always want more people to do the survey. We advertised it 3 times. We talked about it on TV. We talked about it in press releases. We got over 100 respondents. But in a population this size, that gives you a 95% confidence rate in the answers or the input that you receive.
Yeah,
so we're confident that from a
perspective,
statistical perspective,
Yeah, okay.
it's 95%
So you're pretty
accurate.
happy with that mode of reaching
We
out?
are, but then this is where they're good issues to have, but this is where the issue comes with regard to the survey. People responded to the survey, but they didn't necessarily adhere to the tenets of the act.
That
So-
might have been me. You just have this platform and you want to say what you want. And,
So I mean, we received so many responses, but
Yeah.
there were responses. Don't bring more box stores to Portsmouth. Well, that's great input and that's actionable information, but not under
not
ARPA.
related to this funding.
Exactly.
So you got a lot of input on things that,
Sure.
are good ideas, but you can't execute on.
Yes, and ideas that were appropriate, but not for municipal ARPA. There were a lot of respondents that wanted to put more money into the schools. The school department got their own tranche of money,
Yes.
ESRA money, and that money will be used to infuse
I
into
bet there
the
were
school,
a
make
lot
schools
of
better.
ideas around some things that there are other sources of funding too, and so there are trade-offs to be
Yes.
made as to
So-
how you want to use the ARPA funding when
For
you
instance,
know.
pave the roads. We do pave the roads, and we do have a program that keeps our road rating at a very high level compared to the rest of Rhode Island. So we go back for another thing. So, i.e., don't do no evil. So don't create a sustainable or a structural deficit. But also, how do we get the biggest bang for the money that we're about to spend? So, yes, we could take this money and we could theoretically, I guess, put it in the roads. Although how you tie that to COVID, I'm not sure. But we could. But we're already spending money on roads. We received input. Can you put this money into, building a bike path or things like that?
Yeah, which would be
However, they would be wonderful, but would eat up a huge amount of the ARPA. But it's also a program that's already in the state transportation improvement program. So we had to do a calculus. If we were to put money into a program like that, what do you think the state would do?
They're going to take.
They would shift,
Like, you're good,
to
you're covered, you
Pawtucket or
don't need it.
Cranston or Fall River, or
Okay,
not Fall River, but
Yeah.
to Tiverton. That money would go somewhere else because Portsmouth is now going to fund the project that the state was going to fund. So we say, well, why wouldn't we want a twofer? Let the state continue working on that, and we would put the money somewhere else. And behind the scenes, during the whole summer, the whole argument, which was eventually passed, but the whole discussion at the federal level there was a whole discussion going on about infrastructure spending. And now we have another discussion about Build Back Better. So we were trying not to hedge, we were trying to hedge what was going to happen at the federal level and still get the biggest bang for the buck for what we were going to receive. And to put it in perspective, though, $5 million is a lot of money. For mere mortals, I can't even imagine having that much money. However, relative to the size of the budget and relative to the needs of this community, it doesn't go very far.
So you just wanna
LA
be really
County is
smart.
going to get over $1 billion.
Right.
You know, Newport County, you know, a couple million. So it's just, to put it in perspective, it's how do we, even though it's a lot of money, how do we spread it out and get the biggest bang for the buck? And there were a couple other projects that we recommended, and these were reflected right in line with the survey. Infrastructure, capital improvements, and water.
Yeah, like
Both
Prudence
sides.
Island water especially, right?
And you would think, okay, well, maybe Prudence stacked the deck, but when you look at the respondents, no, that was fairly even. Prudence and Aquidneck Island, people are very well aware that Prudence Island has been on a boil water advisory for 3 years.
You're kidding. I
They
didn't know
need
that.
help. Yes, it is a quasi-independent agency. It's not associated with the town hall, but they are our citizens. There just aren't enough residents in Prudence or on Prudence that would be able to fund through a rate increase a solution to the problem. So we worked all summer long with Senator Reid and Senator Whitehouse's staff to try to get money from the federal government to fix Prudence water. We were able to get an earmark into the language of the bill, which hopefully, you know, we'll get a federal budget at some point. The earmark is in there, so we are anticipating that that will get them to about the 90% mark. How do we get them over the finish line and address the water needs there? We can use ARPA, water, broadband, sewer.
So a piece of the recommendation was
for
specifically
Prudence.
for Prudence Island water.
Right
That
in
makes
line with
perfect
the
sense.
survey.
All right, what other things?
To stay on the water theme, you know, there are two things. You know, obviously we want to be able to help people, you know, who have been affected by the pandemic. So we were also trying to, is there a way that we could spend the money where we can cross off multiple, you know, needs, metrics in accordance with the bill? And one of the things that we're addressing and dealing with in Portsmouth is sewer and cesspools. I'm sorry, septic and cesspools. Well, all the septic systems, the undocumented septic systems and the cesspools either need to be replaced or inspected and found to be functioning by the end of 2024. There are still about 500 systems left that are either undocumented or are cesspools. We do have, you know, obviously most people will be able to do this. They'll be able to either draw money from, you know, the equity they have in their homes, or a loan, or they have the cash. They can fix these systems themselves. That's one pool of people. Another pool of people will need some help, and we've, from the very beginning, we've established a septic system loan program, SISLIP, which is a low-interest loan program for those people. But then there are people who could qualify for a SISLIP loan, but even if they qualify for the loan, they still can't afford the loan
It's still
payment.
an untenable situation.
So there are going to be people in Portsmouth who are, in their minds, and maybe, you know, we're not going to, I can't study and vouch for every one of them, but we have heard that there are people in Portsmouth who are in danger of losing their homes because they have to put this money into the mandate. They can't do it, so they'll have to sell their homes to be able to get the money to change the system, and then what happens to them? So we also proposed, and again, we don't have we haven't identified the structure of the program yet, but the council has approved a program that would allow us to grant those people the funds to be able to repair their systems or replace their systems or replace their cesspools.
A grant assistance.
So a grant program.
Okay, all right.
And that also goes back to what got us here in the first place. Obviously, the water quality in the Sakonnet, fecal matter and contaminants being identified that were leaching from undocumented systems or failing systems or cesspools leaching into a storm drain system going out into the Sakonnet. Our storm drains, some of our storm drains, Island Park and that area, are over 100 years old and failing. Some of them are crumbled.
Right.
We have yet to address that. We just don't have the money for it. Now we do. And so that was also one of the priorities that we had presented to the council. Let's fix these storm drains, all right? So we can
So
fix
really
this
unsexy
issue.
stuff, but very important
That,
stuff.
and the third thing is, make sure that we're not creating a structural deficit. How do we help the most amount of people and create something that's sustainable? But then, all with the knowledge that we knew that we were going to go before the council with things that just aren't that pretty.
Or
Most
exciting.
people, I would imagine that 99% of the residents in Portsmouth, when they go home at night, they're thinking about their own family issues. How do I put food on the table? Is my job sustainable? Are my kids doing well in school? They're thinking about normal family stuff. Most people aren't going home thinking about storm drains and cesspools and water on prudence or new fire trucks or an ambulance or software system for the dispatch council or those kinds of things that were presented in the list to the council, but we do, and it's not, as you said, it's not sexy, it's not pretty, but it needs to be done.
Yeah.
And it's you pay me now or pay me later. These are situations that are not going to go away, and
so
they have to be addressed.
Speaking of fire trucks and
Sure.
everything, so let's talk about. I think there's $1.5 million set aside
Correct.
for sort of creating a fund for some fire apparatus and police cruiser stuff. And I think, from my understanding, this sounds like a really wise, smart move because right now we lease those things, and so they hit our operating budget every year. And with this money, we can actually get ahead of the game. Am I thinking about that right?
You are, and it's got a bit of a history to it. I use this little vignette, but it's absolutely true. 3 days after I took over the job, former police chief Tom Lee came into my office and said that a patrol officer got into a patrol car that morning, started their shift, and their feet went through the floorboard of the car. We had a terrible problem. We had not, quite frankly, been investing in capital. We had a huge need for capital requirements, particularly in fire and DPW, fire and police. The largest demand on capital improvement funds or capital funds is next to DPW is the fire department. What ends up happening, we have made a commitment that we're going to pave the roads. So that's a big budget. That's this year it'll be $925,000, almost $1 million, and we'll get back up to $1 million. So we put that in there, and then there are trucks, and capital stuff in DPW, but we almost always fund those. We don't kick those ones down the road. We need our our roads plowed and our catch basins fixed and so on and so forth. But what ends up happening is we get to the capital on the fire side, and maybe we can make that engine last 5 more years.
Right.
Maybe we can make that ladder truck last another year. Maybe we can buy a new engine for the boat and not
but
buy
you're
boat.
surfing this line.
But those are good decisions to make, but we're forced to make those because we don't have the money to replace the equipment that is aging. And we need to address it. We've been looking at this for a number of years. The problem with and we were trying to create a program that would sustain itself. How can we make a capital plan for fire engine apparatus and that type of equipment that isn't subject to being pushed out constantly year after year because other things take priority? Is there a way to do that? We identified a way to do that. The problem is it required an infusion of cash in the beginning. The whole foundation of this program is on the ambulance revenue. So when an ambulance goes out to an accident or goes to somebody's house, insurance pays, there's revenue for that. Yeah. That goes into a fund, which is not enough to get us over the bow wave that we created by pushing things out. So going back to Tom Lee's the story, we knew we needed to address things right away. We didn't have the money to do it, but there was a cheap way to do it relative to a traditional loan, and that was the municipal lease program, which is not a lease like you and I would go out and get a lease for a car, and at the end we got to turn the car back. No, it's just a low-cost financing option for municipalities that was able to, that we took advantage of, that was able, that allowed us to modernize and fix our capital needs. Now it's time to get away from that, because as you stated correctly, all right, we don't want to we don't want to have these lease payments on our books for eternity. So as those fall off, the plan was, how do we create a sustaining program? And that's what we addressed with the ARPA funds. We can use the ARPA funds to infuse some cash into a capital program, and then as that clears the bow wave, the continuing capital needs in the out years, all the way up for the next 30 years, we can sustain those needs through a portion of the ambulance funds.
Yeah.
Some portion will still go to the general fund, and then about 50%, I can't remember right off the top of my head, 55% would go into the what the council has now deemed a public safety capital fund.
Right.
And that will fund the
it.
major apparatus, and that will fund 2 police vehicles a year.
Long time coming. So I'd say congrats
So-
on that. That sounds
so,
very smart.
Again, not real sexy.
No,
you know,
no, none of this is actually
but-
particularly sexy.
You know,
So Rich, we've just got a couple minutes left, and let me just ask you, what do you want to leave people with?
yeah, I think what I want to tell people is that the process is still ongoing. The priorities that were presented to the council are just that, they're priorities. They've only obligated a certain percentage of the ARPA funds that we're going to receive. So if there are needs out there that we have not addressed, get them to me in the form of a civic support request, and most of these requests are coming from civic support organizations that already receive funding. Identify what it is you want to do, why it's in line with ARPA, and why it should be a priority, and I'll ensure that it gets to the council in the February meeting.
Right, because they're the decision makers, not you, right?
Exactly, and I'm getting inundated right now with requests for ARPA money. I don't get to make those decisions. The council will make those decisions, but I'll ensure that those requests get to the council in a timely fashion, and a decision will be made.
Right, so civic support, and how does it line up with the guidelines? Because that's
Correct.
one of the most important things, is we want to spend this money correctly, too.
Right, and we will be audited, so
Yes.
we have to
Yes.
do this correctly.
Yeah, play the straight and narrow.
That's right.
Well, thank you for coming and clarifying, explaining. This has been very, very interesting, and I appreciate your time. I hope you'll come back in the new year and speak to us again about the things on your plate.
All right. Thank you, Carmen.
All right, I appreciate it, Rich.
Right.
Thank you, everyone out there, for tuning in to Portsmouth This Week. I hope you found this as interesting as I have. This is complicated, crazy, exciting, and I really do hope that we can meet some of the very important needs of our citizens of Portsmouth. We'll see you next time.